Here we are coming into the holiday season. This is Iron Sharpens Iron. No man walks alone. Thank you all for coming out this morning. It's great to be together again on another brilliant Saturday morning. We have our business at hand and to address here. I want to make sure a couple announcements here. Remember, this is all about men, and no man walks alone. So, as we're starting to migrate to small table groups, I want you to be thinking a little bit about groups. In Dave?
Well, we're just at the first of the year. That's kind of our target time for solidifying and assimilating our small groups. We've been kind of floating up until this point, so start thinking about it today. And what I'd like to do, if we could, there's tables with 2 and 3, maybe 2 could move over to where there's 3. Make sure we try to get 5 guys per table, and that's what our goal is going to be for our small groups. 4 guys on the table meeting. Right. So start thinking about it, start considering who you're with, and right about the first of the year, we're all going to try and settle into permanent activities. Thanks, Mark.
More permanent. Yeah. Not the half.
Right.
It's not going to be assigned seating. We're still going to be festivals. Still sit wherever we go. That's great. I want to mention that this morning the breakfast group's meeting at 8:45. Where are you going to be there?
Yeah, down at VTAP. Come on down.
V's, okay. So the breakfast group has got a breakfast meeting this morning after this meeting at 8:45, which is great. Mr. Fitzgerald, would you like to open us, please?
Father God, we just are so grateful to be here today with you and in the midst of all these men that are here to just sharpen one another. And Lord, we just are so appreciative for the opportunity to just be together and to hear, the words through the speakers that just bring forth, those things in life that we need to hear, that we need to know. Lord, we ask that you just put our burdens aside for the day, and we just entrust in you these things, and we ask your blessings upon each and every man here, and we thank you for their time and their commitment, and we ask your blessing upon our speakers here today as well. In your name we pray, amen.
So where we're migrating here is to a point where the small tables become more impactful in your relationships. And in fact, notice that we changed the model a little bit where we have an opening prayer, not a closing prayer, because we expect that the small tables then ultimately, as you discuss the topics through the discussion documents, then you will close the morning off with potentially a prayer for anybody at your table that might need prayer. And that's kind of what we're heading. If you like this idea or don't like this idea, don't be shy, let us know. We're just trying to evolve this so that it makes sense for everybody. The process is still the same. We're going to have just a short business meeting section right in the morning here, and then we're going to jump right into the presentation, last about 30 minutes. We have a discussion document. As always, it's on your table. You can make some notes with that. We've started to put biblical references and all the scripture references on the discussion document as it was an item that was brought forward to us. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Potentially, you can take it back home, your piece of paper there, and share it with your spouse. And when she says, what was the meeting all about this morning? You've got the scripture references right there. So hopefully that encourages some discussion. The topic this morning is current trends in investment. What does that have to do with the Bible and our wisdom? And it's just amazing how much the Bible speaks to this particular topic. But before I get involved in it, I'm going to cover a little bit of the information here, and then we have our guest speaker, who's actually a participant in the Iron Sharpens Iron with us. You may not even know who he is. But Bill graduated from ASU. He's got not only an undergrad degree in economics, summa cum laude graduate, and an MBA as well. And we ran into Bill as he, I should say Ted did, and ultimately invited him here. He's been participant in this program, and he runs the Edward Jones office right down there by Safeway. And so, Bill, stand up so everybody can see who you are. Our unknown investment guru right here. So Bill and I are going to kind of bounce back and forth this morning on the presentation. Anybody have any questions to begin with here before we start? One of the concepts of iron sharpens iron is that we have a lot of breadth of topic. And again, this would not be a particular topic you would see in a normal, let's call it men's group or a ministry of any type, but we want to bring you the latest and greatest that we possibly can. Any topics that jump out at you, send me an email, let me know. We're building the 2019 topic schedules right now. We do have the first quarter already lined up. And the theme, remember the theme of the first section here was a man and his family. And we're going into the first quarter next year, a man and in his community. So we'll be speaking about a lot of ways that men interact with each other. Okay, making sense? Okay, great. What's the outcome of today? Your personal outcome will be you are going to learn the wisdom of the Bible regarding investments. And there's many phrases in there. And you also hear about the 5 hot topics for today's investors. Get that piece from Bill. The wisdom found in the Bible speaks to 5 key behaviors, and they're on your sheet there, and I want to draw your attention to the 5 key behaviors. First of all, getting good counsel. Secondly, planning ahead. Third, saving and investing. Fourth, diversifying. And last but not least, tithing. Before we get going, let me ask you, I'm assuming all of you are well invested. Many of you retired, some of you still working and investing. When I say get good counsel, all of you went out and found counsel. I assume you're not financial investment gurus. How did you do that?
Got married.
You got married. Wise man. Married the right person. That's what you call marrying up.
Listen to a friend.
Friends.
Our friends.
Got kind of advice from friends, what they were doing and how that worked. Okay, great.
I got in the business for a while.
Sorry?
I said I got in the business for a
You
while.
actually did it.
Yeah.
Learned a little bit about it. Did you get the Series 7 license? Or
I was okay with it.
you worked for Payne Weber, so absolutely. Got a lot of information that way. Chuck?
We did a few seminars.
A few seminars. Great. Anybody else? How did you get counsel? What does the Bible say about getting counsel? Down there I have all the scriptural references here. I'm just going to kind of blow through them quickly and tell you what they are. Proverbs 15:22. It says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Not just one, but many. Proverbs 19:2. Also, it is not good for a person to be without knowledge, and he who hurries, his footsteps error. Don't be in a rush. Proverbs 12:15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice. Proverbs 28:26. Whoever trusts his own mind is a fool, but he who walks in wisdom will be delivered. And last but not least, Proverbs 24. For by wise guidance you can wage your war, and in an abundance of counselors there is victory. So I think the Bible is telling us very clearly not to pull this off on our own, not to Google, how do I invest? Visit with a lot of people. Understand exactly what the plan should be. The Bible also speaks to planning ahead. Proverbs 13:16. A wise man thinks ahead, a fool doesn't, and even brags about it. And Luke 14:28-30. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not sit down first and count the cost, whether he has enough to finish it? Lest after he's laid the foundation and is not able to finish it, all begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and couldn't even complete it. So it takes some effort on your part to plan ahead and think about what it is. And a lot of people talk quite candidly about budget, what we're going to need, how much we're going to need for retirement, how much we're going to need at different points in time in our life. And then start planning ahead in that thought process that actually creates the completed process well. Saving and investing. The Bible speaks a lot about saving and investing. Saving up for a rainy day, putting your money to work, multiplying it is very wise. And there are a couple of interesting Bible stories about that. Proverbs 21:20, the wise store up choice food and olive oil, but the fools gulp theirs down immediately. Have you saved? Proverbs 21:15, the plans of the diligent lead to profit, as surely as haste leads to poverty. So we get lots of guidance that are clearly telling us to be smart, be thoughtful, and be mindful about what we're doing. Bill Ritman spent 20 years in the finance industry and decided he wanted to launch his own business. He started this Edward Jones office right down here at Safeway, and I'm pleased to announce Bill is going to take you through the actual steps here that are powerful. Bill?
Thank you. Just give me one moment to get this all set up here.
Turned on, connected.
Thanks, Mike. Okay. All right. Let's see where we're going here. Okay. So everybody, can you hear me? That sounds good. Okay. Great. So yeah, I think I had probably a little bit of a more interesting path to get here than others. I was actually setting up for an event. We were sponsoring a breakfast, or co-sponsoring a breakfast here at the Mount Vista Club a couple months ago, and we were just about ready to get in, and we saw this group of people that were already in here, and we're like, what's going on? Who's here this early in the morning? We thought we were getting here early. So that's when I met Ted. He invited me to come here. And you know, it's interesting because my wife says that she doesn't believe in coincidences. And that, you know, more and more that she says that, the more I believe it myself. And so I don't really believe in coincidences either. And I think there's a reason that we met that day. So I'm really just grateful to be here with you today and be able to talk a little bit about some of the things that I've learned over the years. I really want to just start out talking about a story that's in the Bible that many of you are probably familiar with. It's in the book of Matthew, chapter 25. This is verses 14 through 30. And this is one of the stories that Jesus was teaching about and talking about. And like a lot of the stories that he told, a lot of the things that he said, there's information that can be gained on multiple levels. I just love the Bible because it's really in many ways like poetry, where it's just, there's so many meanings that are given and there's so many levels that you can read into it. And so the story is about a master that had 3 servants or 3 slaves, and he gave them all talents. And so the Bible talks about talents. We know talent back then was, you know, a unit of money, right? So he gave them 3, coins. Let's just imagine it's a coin or something. And he actually gave them all different amounts, okay? And so the first one, he gave 5 talents. The second one, he gave 2 talents. And the third one, he gave 1 talent. And does anybody remember? I know there's, Dan over here. I probably shouldn't ask him because I know he knows. But does anybody know from that story what happened to those 3 slaves or those 3 servants that received those talents? Anybody? Raise your hand if you know what happened with. Does that story sound familiar to anyone? Okay, yeah, go for it.
They were rewarded. The 2 slaves that invested wisely made money for their master, and they were rewarded for what they did. And the one servant who basically just buried it and didn't put it in the bank or didn't invest in it, I guess he was punished.
Right, he was, yeah, very good. So excellent, that's exactly what happened. So the ones that received the 5 talents and the 2 talents, they both traded their money and they actually doubled their money. So within a amount of time, and we don't know how long it was, but within an amount of time, they were able to actually double the amount of talents that they had. And the third one, just like what was mentioned, is he buried it in the ground and didn't do anything with it. So what I really like is when the master comes back, what he says to those who came and brought back more than what he gave them. He says, "Well done, good and faithful slave. You were faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master." Wow, isn't that great? Wouldn't we all like to hear that someday? I think we would, right? So, but the slave that only brought back the 1 talent, he was reprimanded, okay? And the 1 talent that he gave back was given to the one that had 10, right? Because the one that had 10, he knew what to do with it, right? Interesting. So, like I said, there's, that story, you can think of that on so many different levels. There's just the financial piece of it. There's the, what are we doing with what we've been given part of it. There's the, accountability part of it. Someday we will be accountable for what we've done and the things that, there's so many different levels that you can see that story at. So I really like to think about stories like that. And really, as we were preparing for this, Mike and I, we spoke about that story. We spoke about a few things, and we also talked about some of the things that are maybe concerning to a lot of the investors today. Some of like we said, the 5 hot topics. What's out there right now? What is everybody thinking about? And so, as we discussed this, one of the things that we talked about, and it's become even more, more prevalent on a lot of people's minds, is what's going on in the market, right? Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a lot of volatility, which is just, ups and downs. The market reaching highs and going, several percentage moves in a day. And so what's going on there, right? And so really, when you take a step back and try to understand what's happening, what we see is a lot of the movement is being driven by speculation and what I call knee-jerk reactions. Like there'll be a story here, and somebody will say something here, and something go on here, and it's a lot of the things that are happening are not indicative of of making whole markets move. And so, because really the fundamentals behind it are what makes money, and what makes money in the market is just like we talked about in the story, right? People that go out and work and do something to make more money, right? That's what we're all about, and that's as we worked, and many of you worked for many years, you understand that that you have expenses and you have revenues, and you try to make your revenues greater than your expenses. If you can do that, if you're successful over an amount of time, then you increase the value of your business, right? And so that's what really drives value, okay? And so sometimes there are barriers to that, or it makes it more difficult, or there's headwinds when you're trying to move something and you just can't. And so what people are speculating on is all those things. Once you see the results, once you see what's happening and how much money businesses are making, that's really what drives the market ultimately, right? So there haven't been a whole lot of companies that have come out with their results, and the results are really what drives the value of the companies and what drives the value of the market. And so everything that's out there right now is people thinking about how it's going to affect profits, and so when we really take a step back, there's a lot of positive things that are out there. When you look at the media, they're always focused on the negative. Unfortunately, I guess that's kind of what their job is. But but if you look at the numbers, there's a lot of strength in the U.S. economy right now. And so there's a few reasons for that. One is that we still have a lot of good impacts from the tax cuts, the corporate tax cuts. Even the media has said this, most of the money went to the corporations. Well, if you're an investor, that money is going to you, right? So the tax cut was actually really beneficial. We also are experiencing very low interest rates historically right now. So even though interest rates are working their way up, we're actually still in a period of relatively low interest rates, historically speaking. we also have very low unemployment. I think everybody remembers back about 10 years ago when we had a very different situation where there were a lot of people that were out of work. And like Mike had mentioned, I was working at the time, I was working for a different company, for a financial services company, and every day, I remember every day going into work, everybody on my team was worried about, am I going to be next? Am I going to be let go? A lot of you probably remember that and what it was like to be in that situation, or to even have to transition jobs maybe at that time because of what was going on in the economy. We don't see that at all. That's not happening or anywhere near from happening. There's also been really strong, like I mentioned, really strong corporate earnings growth. And so those earnings eventually flow back to the investors. So those are some really positive fundamentals that are happening in the U.S. economy. But does that mean that everything is rosy and perfect? No, it doesn't. Something that we probably need to realize is we need to, it's okay to have expectations, but we should keep our expectations realistic, right? Because we've seen, of course, in 2018, a lot more volatility than we saw in 2017. I think 2017 kind of lulled people into thinking, oh, well, we can just go up and up and up and up and up and never come down. Well, it seemed like 2017 you could have invested in almost anything and you would have done well. So 2018 you have to be a little bit more selective, and because, like we said, return of volatility, especially in the last couple weeks. So 2017 we saw double-digit growth in many people's portfolios. So 2018 maybe that's down to single-digit growth, or maybe even negative for a little bit. So really the whole point of that is to make sure that you don't think that just because 2017 was a great year, that 2018 will be a great year as well. Usually that's not how how things go. So just keep your return expectations realistic. Number 3 on the 5 things of what you want to look at, or hot topics for investors right now: slowly rising interest rates and inflation. And so interest rates are really kind of split into 2 different categories. There's short-term interest rates and there's long-term interest rates. And they're actually controlled by 2 different forces. The Fed actually is, the Federal Reserve Bank, they're the ones that pretty much control the short-term interest rates. The market has a lot bigger of an impact on the long-term interest rates. And so the short-term interest rates, they're like I said, they're set by the Fed. They actually meet periodically throughout the year to determine what the short-term interest rates are going to be. Now, the next opportunity that they have to set interest rates is coming up here on December 18th and 19th. And they meet a few times a year, and after they meet, like every other time that they meet, they have a press conference. And usually it's the times that they meet when they have a press conference that they actually, that's when they're announcing a change, or, that's usually when interest rates will be going up, because they have that press conference opportunity and they're able to tell people the reasoning behind what they're doing, okay? So this time that they're meeting in December 18th and 19th, they do have a press conference scheduled. So there is an expectation that they may raise rates. Now, some people try to figure out beforehand whether they raise rates or not. Now I think, well, why is that important? Why is it important, whether they raise rates or not? Well, a lot of things are dependent on those interest rates that they set. If you think about it, if you have a credit card, sometimes the rate that you're paying on your credit card is tied into those rates, right? So people that are going out and borrowing money, it's harder for them to borrow money when the interest rate goes up, okay? Now, people that are loaning money, or people that are buying CDs or bonds or something else, they want the interest rates to go up because then they get more money out of it, right? So it all depends on what side of the equation you're on. But overall, when interest rates go up and it's harder for people to borrow more, then that kind of slows down the economy. If you think about it, if somebody's credit card interest rate is going up, they're not going to be able to afford, the same payment that they did in the past, or they won't be able to buy as much as they did in the past. And so that in sequence will make it so that they're not purchasing as much. So that slows things down a little bit. So that's why it's important to know about interest rates. And so Jerome Powell, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, he has made comments over the last few months, and people, dissect everything that he says, and what is he thinking about, and what is he saying. They're trying to figure out beforehand which way interest rates are going, right? And so in the past, like in past months, he has said, and the word that they use is accommodative, right? So are the interest rates that are set now, are they accommodative? And accommodative means, does it allow the economy to grow, okay? And so he, in months past, said, oh, we're still very, very accommodative, which means he thinks we're going to go up, right? So recently what he said was, that, we're still accommodative, but not as much as we might have thought before, basically, okay? So that made people think, oh, well, they're not going to raise rates as much, or they might skip December, or, they might just only stop in December. So there's a lot of speculation on that. The only time we'll really know is on, what did I say, December 19th. So if anybody watches the financial news, I know I do, but if you don't, that's okay. That will be the next time that the Fed may raise those short-term interest rates. So there's still an expectation, and there's still a trend on slowly rising interest rates. And that's okay as long as it doesn't choke off too much of the economic growth that we've seen. And so it's actually not necessarily a bad thing either, because what the Fed is trying to do is they're trying to get themselves in a position. For many years, interest rates were really, really super low. The reason they did that was to get us out of that recession that happened back in 2008, 2009. And so as they've been able to raise the interest rates, now they've given themselves some leverage. In case things turn to the negative pretty quickly, they'll have a lever that they can pull. What they always like to do is have levers that they can pull to try to pull the economy out of that downturn. What we see around the world is in Europe and in China, their interest rates are a lot lower than the U.S. In fact, Europe and China, they're somewhat near zero in some cases. And so, and Japan, I know, is near zero as well. They don't have that leverage that the U.S. has. So as they're doing that, see, what the Fed does is they don't really look at the stock market, although they may be interested in it. It's not really what makes them make their decisions. They look at unemployment, because their mandate is to get people employed, make sure we are pretty close to full employment. So they're interested in unemployment, and they're interested in economic growth, okay? Because we've seen very strong positive economic growth over the last few quarters, because people are employed, they feel like they can still raise it a little bit. So I think there's a good chance that December they may raise it, and even on into 2019. But I don't think that they'll go too far. So, okay, that's on interest rates. Okay, so it's slowly rising interest rates and inflation. The other thing they're very concerned with is inflation. They have a target of about 2%. Historically, over like the last 100 years or so, if you average out the inflation over in the U.S., it's been closer to 3. But 2 is actually not bad. That's what they target. That's what they try to do. In fact, many years ago, they never even told us what the target was. They've only recently, over the last 10 years or so, they've released that number. And so now we know they're targeting 2%, which is pretty common for most economies to do that. All right. The other thing that we probably need to do is, talking about this, all the stuff we've talked about more or less has been on the short term. We know that eventually, at some time, the economy always cycles, right? So there's up cycles, and there's down cycles, there's up cycles and down cycles, and for many of you in this room, you've been around long enough to have lived through many of those goes up cycles and down cycles. And so, you know what follows an up cycle is a down cycle. What follows a down cycle is an up cycle. Although it's hard to think of it when you're living in it, it's hard to see the future that far. I know it. I know how hard it is. I know the environment that you're in, and it's difficult when things are down to realize that, hey, this is going to pick itself back up someday and take off. So that's the hardest thing is getting past that mentally, right? But I heard somebody explain it more as like a clock, if you think about the economy, rather than a roller coaster. Some people feel like they're on a roller coaster, but it's kind of like a clock, and you have to think to yourself, well, if the economy is like a clock, what time is it right now? Are we closer to, and when I'm talking about up and down, are we close to, 10 o'clock? Are we close to 11 o'clock? Are we close to midnight? Which means that we're on our, the next tick is going to go down. I think definitely for the short term, we're not at midnight. Maybe we're at 11 o'clock, I don't know. But how long does it take to get from 11 o'clock to midnight? That's a good question. So if you think about it like that, as more of a clock, you have to realize that at some time, things will start to go down. And so what's important to do, and Mike talked a little bit about, preparing and putting a plan in place. Important to put a plan in place for when that does happen, whether that's, next week or next month, next year, or 5, 10 years from now. We all know what's going to happen. So let's put a plan in place, however, that means for you, whatever that means to you, put a plan in place for when things go the other direction. And so that might include things like, saving some extra money. It might mean shifting your investments around a little bit, just preparation for that. It might mean preparing in other ways. Maybe if you're younger, maybe getting a skill that you could use if you were to get let go from your current position, if you feel like it might be in danger someday. There's a lot of different things that you can do in order to prepare for some type of a downturn or some type of a reversal. So that's important to think about too. The other thing is to find out what the right mix is for you. And when I say mix, there's different classes of investments that are out there. There's ones that are speculative, and there's ones that are, that go cyclical to the economy, and there's ones that are the exact reverse. They're the exact opposite of the way the economy goes. And then there's ones that are very stable, and they don't lose value very much. Usually the ones that don't lose value are kind of like a bank account. They don't gain a lot, but they don't lose a lot. So it's important for you to find the right mix for you in your situation, because the right mix for, I would say everybody in this room has a different right mix. So how do you find that right mix? Well, just like what Mike said, get some advice. Talk to somebody that knows about it, that knows how to set something up like that. That's important. Also think about investing in, we talked about the U.S. a lot, but there's also other countries out there that are good to invest in. So there's, think about adding some international investments. Think about, things like bonds and, things that you may not have thought about in the past, okay? Also, it's important if you're investing in, when you're putting money into an investment account, as you're earning money, you usually have two choices. If you're working, you usually have some type of either a 401k or an IRA or something like that. That's a choice, but you can also put money into just what we call a regular taxable account. Okay? And so there's different implications with putting it into different types of investments. If you put money into either an IRA or a 401k or something like that, then you don't pay taxes on it when you put the money into it. In fact, all that money that you put in is reduced from your income when you go to file your taxes. And so as you're looking at and changing around your investments in what time you change investments in there, like sell something or buy something, there's really no tax consequences to a buy or a sell in that type of an account. In a taxable account, there are consequences, tax consequences to buying and selling things. And so the way that you manage an IRA or a 401k is actually different than how you would manage a taxable account. And so, so that's something that's important. You know, talk to a CPA or somebody that has an understanding of what the differences of how those two types of accounts work. So for an IRA or 401k, you're only really taxed on it when you take the money out. Okay? And so once you take the money out, then you get taxed on it. Eventually, you know, the government has figured out a way to get the money eventually. So, in fact, for some of you in here, you may be at the age where if you set up an IRA or a 401k many years ago, you realize that the government said, well, that's great to put that money in there and keep it growing and everything, but you know, by the time you reach the age of 70 and a half, they're going to ask you to take a required distribution out of that account every year. And so there's a way to calculate that out. It's pretty simple. There's tables out there. But they will eventually want you to take that money out because they need to start taxing it at some point. So that's just the way that the IRS is, and they realize that, you know, if they let you keep it in there forever, some people might do that. They might never take the money out. So, all right. So that's, you know, that's just some things that you can do to prepare for pullbacks. And just realize that they're just a regular part of the market. They do happen. They will happen. You know, timing is very difficult. But you know, as I talk about timing, that's an interesting thing too, because there's a saying that we have in the industry, and I think some of you may have heard of it before. But it's very difficult to time the market, and I know there's people that try to do this. They try to buy something just at the right time and sell it just at the right time, and there's some people that are really, really good at that, okay? I'm not discounting the fact that it can be done, but it's very difficult. You have to have a lot of information, you have to have a lot of analysis, and you know, some people that try to do that and don't always succeed, so my hat off to those that are able to do that. What's even easier than timing things just right is having the time in the market. And so it's so time in the market is more important than timing the market. So that's the saying that we have. So a few years back, I was actually giving a presentation to a group of youth, and they were probably about 14 to 18 years old, I would say, maybe 15 to 18, something like that. And I talked to them a little bit about, you know, some of the famous investors and some of the people out there, and I talked to them about Warren Buffett, and I'm sure many of you know who Warren Buffett is. He's a great investor and has some great information and advice. I remember, you know, speaking of Warren Buffett, I remember back in 2008, somebody was asking him, "Are you upset that, you know, that all of the investments are down and everything's, you know, down from what it was a couple of years ago?" And he said, "No." He said, "I buy stocks." He said, "They're cheap." It's like, everything's, you know, 25, 50% off. This is like me walking into the store and everything's, you know, 20. He's like, I'm in here for the long term. And he was not selling at that time, he was buying. So it's interesting to see his perspective, and it's really played out well over the long term. Obviously, it's worked out really well for him. So, but I was talking to them about Warren Buffett, and I said, "What is it that you have that Warren Buffett doesn't have?" I said, "You, as investors, you actually have an advantage over Warren Buffett. Do you know what it is?" Time. Yeah. So Warren Buffett, his days are a lot shorter than many of those people I was talking to. And so, so the more time you have, the more you can do, right? And so some of us in here have more time than others, probably, but it's an important concept because it really is. Time is one of the most important factors when you're looking at investments. So you might have a different strategy based on the amount of time that you have, the time period that you're looking at. Are you investing for 1 year, for 2 years, for 5 years? Are you going to need this money to, to do a renovation on your house or something? And so maybe you only have a few years until you need the money. Or are you investing it for 10 years? Are you putting it away? Or are you investing it so that you can have some type of a legacy to pass on to the next generation? You might think about investing that money differently based on the amount of time that you have to work with it. So that's important to think about. So the important thing really when investing in anything is maintaining that long-term perspective. And I know it's hard. It's hard when you turn on the radio and they're talking about what's going on in the markets and that everything's down and everything's doom and gloom and it's or you're looking at the news and they're talking about how there's a trade war going on and there's instability in Europe and Brexit and all these things that hit the headlines. It's hard to retain a really good perspective and say, well, how much of this really impacts what's going on in my portfolio, and how much does what does this really mean? It's hard to know because sometimes there are impacts there, and some of them are short term and some are long term. But the important thing to do is to take a step back and realize that I can't tell the future, but I can tell you what has happened in the past. And they say that maybe the future doesn't repeat itself, or history doesn't always repeat itself, right? But it always typically rhymes with what's happened in the past. I've heard that before, and it's kind of true, right? So history may not repeat itself exactly, but if you look back historically on what's happened in the U.S. and with the U.S. economy, every time somebody's counted it out or said that things are going bad, those things only last for a short amount of time. In perspective, short amount of time, right? If I were to show you some charts of what the Dow index has done over time, it would be incredible. You wouldn't even believe what happens, but it's over long periods of time, not short periods of time. So just taking that step back and looking at perspective and thinking, well, do I need, if you need the money right away, then yeah, that short-term perspective, you need that. But if it's long-term money, and I think mostly money that you're investing is long-term money, if it's long-term money, take that step back and look at the picture in a different way and realize that just looking at a narrow couple days or couple months or even a couple of years, it doesn't show the whole picture at all. So sometimes I'll sit down with some of the people that I work with and I'll talk to them about that perspective and getting that perspective. And I'll ask people, okay, things you might be looking at things that are down right now in your portfolio, and that might it's definitely concerning and upsetting. Especially because, like we mentioned before, 2017 was such a great year. So I'll ask them, 2017 was an up year for the market, right? Most people remember that it was. That's only 1 year ago. So 1 year ago, yeah, 2017 was great. Man, we needed 2017 every year. Yeah, we do. 2016, do you remember 2016? Was that an up year or down year? Most people are like, okay, well, 2016, let me think. What was happening in 2016? Oh, the election, that's right. So after the election, I remember, the stock market was on a tear. It was, actually before that, it wasn't doing too well, but I remember 2016, that was, election year, and after the election, everything went well, and so yeah, 2016 was a great year. Okay, yeah, you're right. 2015, do you remember 2015? That was only 3 years ago. Do you remember 2015? Was 2015 an up year for the market, or was it a down year for the market? Most people have to think, wow, 2015, man, that was only 3 years ago. They're like, was it up? No, actually it wasn't. 2015, that was only like 3 years ago, right? And almost everybody I've asked, nobody remember. I mean, some of you may remember, some of you may have had some, impacts of that. But it was only 3 years ago, and how quickly we've forgotten, right? How soon? So just put that in perspective and think, hey, 3 years from now, is this going to make a difference? But will I even remember that this happened 3 years from now, right? Maybe not. That's only 3 years goes by really fast. I don't know about you guys, but my stage in life, 3 years just seems to go by like that. So put that in perspective and just realize that, things happen, things go up, they go down. Maintain that long-term perspective. Think about, especially if you're putting money in and you're investing for the long term, I like to think of it as almost like my house, right? And so I put money into my house, I bought my house, and really there's only 2 days that are important in the price of my house. Now I can go out, I know there's websites out there where I can go and check the price every day or every month on my house, right? And sometimes it's interesting to look it up and say, hey, what's my house worth? Is it up? Is it down? But there's really only 2 days that the price matters. The day that I buy it and the day that I sell it, right? And so think about it like that. And it's interesting and it's, important and don't ignore, I'm not telling you to ignore price dips and fluctuations because that might be a signal to do something, but just step back and realize that if you bought something that's high quality, when we bought our house, we did a lot of research and we wanted to buy a quality house, place for our family to grow up and to live, and so I'm getting a lot of value out of my house, even if it's not going up, And so just think of your investments like that. It's like a house or something that you put money into it, and if you're not planning to sell it, you don't need to be worried about the price as long as you bought something that's high quality that you believe in and something you think is a good investment over time. Because the value of that investment may go up or down on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So think about it like that. Everything else really is just noise. It's interesting, it's fun to talk about sometimes, but really those are only 2 price points that are really important. So those are some of the things that I hope I've talked about. If you are an investor, I hope I talked to some of the things that you've been thinking about or worried about. I hope that I was able to shed some light on that. I do have more information afterwards if you'd like to come talk to me. I have all these 5 things and charts and all this great stuff if you want to look at it. Have tons more information if anybody that wants to talk about it. There is one thing that I think is important, just as important as anything else we've talked about. And so I'm going to turn it back over to Mike to talk about tithing. Mike?
I'd like to draw your attention to one of the key words on your discussion document, and that's diversifying, before I jump into tithing. James 4:13-15 says, "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we'll go to this or that city and spend a year there, carry on business and make money. Why do you not even know why do you do that? You don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. You're a mist. You appear for a little while over here and then you vanish." Instead, what James says, you ought to be saying, if it's the Lord's will, we will live and we will do this or we will do that. Diversify. Consider an important concept to not be focused on one particular item. I always have a hard term with that word. Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes. Invest in 7 ventures. Yes, 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land. So, not all your money in one big bucket. The summary of the Bible wisdom is simple. Get advice from others who know more than you. Only a fool doesn't plan ahead. It's good to save, invest, and multiply your holdings. Don't forget to have diverse holdings in order to reduce risk. Invest in a way that's faithful to God's Word and that doesn't harm others. And last but not least, don't rely on money. Rely on God. Because He says if your riches increase, you got to be careful not to set your heart on those riches. I do want to address tithing, and I'm taking over the annual sermon in your particular church. Sometimes biannual, sometimes quarterly, where they get into this, but it's amazing what the Bible says about tithing, and I don't know if you know about it. And I spent many years in Southern California and was privileged to go to Saddleback Church, to Rick Warren's Saddleback Church, and sat many times in the first 10 rows and listened to Rick. And Rick has a view of tithing that's a little bit different. He says, whatever you want God to bless, you have to put Him in it. We're asking for blessings from God all the time. Are we putting God in it? So if you want God to bless your finances, you have to put Him first in your money. And I think that's a wonderful principle of tithing when you start to think about that. You know, the first 10%. Do you pay God first and expect then that God will take care of you? There are 4 verses that explain the promise, the purpose, and the place, and the actual day for tithing. Are you aware of those? Anybody heard of them? First, Proverbs 3, 9 through 10 gives the promise about tithing. And it says, honor the Lord by giving Him the first part of all your income, and He will fill your barns with wheat and barley, and overflow your wine vats with the finest wines. So if you pay God first, you will be blessed. God says if you honor Him with the first part of your income, He will bless you financially. Promise in the Bible. Why does God tell us to tithe? The answer to that is in Deuteronomy. So the purpose of tithing is to teach you always to put God first in your lives. When you get your paycheck, pay God first. God doesn't need your money, but He wants what it represents, which is your heart. He wants you to trust Him. Where should you tithe? The Bible has clear direction on that. Do you tithe to the United Way? Do you tithe to your brother who's been out of work for 3 years? So no, that's charity. Tithing is an act of worship. It goes to God. In Malachi 3:10, verse 10 says, bring to the storehouse a full tenth of what you earn. Test me in this, says the Lord. I will open the windows of heaven for you and pour out all the blessings you need. The storehouse is the temple or the place where you worship in your church. When are you supposed to tithe? The Bible speaks clearly to this. You do it on your day of worship. In 1 Corinthians 16, on every Lord's Day, each of you should put aside something from what you have earned during the week and use it for this offering. The amount depends on how much the Lord has helped you earn. Interesting concept. The amount depends on how much the Lord has helped you earn. When you give to God on the first day of the week, first part of your day, the first of your money, you're declaring, you're really number one in my life, God. And so the concept of tithing is painful, or is it? You want to be blessed finances? You tithe. Note that the verse says to put aside. You plan to do this. Back to what we were talking about being well planned. Tithing should not be an impulsive thing. You've got a plan for it, so you're honoring God's plan and the purpose for tithing. And then you can watch how God blesses you in your finances. Having said that, let's take a short break and then we'll go back to our small groups to discuss.